Long before heroes became legends, before songs were sung of bravery and monsters, there was an island ruled by pride. That island was Crete, and its king was Minos. King Minos was not a weak ruler. He was strong, respected, and feared. His palace stood tall above the sea, shining in the sunlight like a crown upon the land. Ships came from distant shores to trade with him. His people obeyed him. His enemies avoided him. But Minos wanted more than respect. He wanted to be chosen by the gods. One day he stood at the edge of the sea, looking into the deep blue waters, and raised his hands. "Great Poseidon," he called, his voice carried by the wind, "send me a sign. Show my people that I am the rightful king. Give me a gift from the sea, and I swear I will honor you with a sacrifice." The sea grew still. Then it began to move. Waves rose, swirling, and from the depths emerged a creature so magnificent that even the bravest soldiers stepped back in fear. A bull, but not an ordinary bull. Its body was massive and powerful, its muscles shining like polished stone, its horns curved like crescent moons, sharp and perfect. Its hide was as white as fresh snow glowing under the sun. It was a creature of the gods, a gift from Poseidon. Minos stared at it, his heart pounding. "This," he whispered, "will prove my right to rule." The people gathered. They saw the bull. They fell to their knees. "The gods have chosen Minos," they said. And Minos smiled. But in that smile, something changed. Because when the time came to keep his promise, he hesitated. The bull was too beautiful, too powerful, too perfect to kill. "I will offer another bull," Minos said to his priests. "One from my own herd. Poseidon will not notice." The priests looked at each other, uneasy. The gods always notice, one of them warned. But Minos waved him away. "I am king. The gods have already shown their favor." And so, instead of sacrificing the divine bull, Minos kept it. He placed it among his royal herds, treating it like a treasure. And for a moment, nothing happened. The skies remained calm. The sea was quiet. Minos believed he had outsmarted a god. He was wrong. Far beneath the waves, Poseidon watched, and his anger grew like a storm. "If Minos will not honor his promise," the god said, his voice echoing through the ocean depths, "then he will learn what it means to betray the gods." But Poseidon did not strike Minos directly. Instead, he chose something far worse. He turned his gaze toward Queen Pasiphae, the wife of Minos, and he cursed her, not with illness, not with death, but with desire, a dark, unnatural desire that would destroy everything. At first, Pasiphae did not understand what was happening. She walked through the palace gardens one morning, as she often did. The air was warm, filled with the scent of flowers. Servants followed at a distance, whispering softly. Then she saw it, the white bull. It stood among the other animals, calm and silent, its presence impossible to ignore. Pasiphae stopped. Her breath caught. Something inside her shifted. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. "What is this?" she whispered. The bull turned its head. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the curse took hold. Days passed. Pasiphae became restless. She could not sleep. She could not eat. Her thoughts returned again and again to the bull. She knew it was wrong. She knew it was madness. But the feeling only grew stronger. Finally, she could bear it no longer. She needed help, not from priests, not from the king, but from someone who understood strange and impossible things. She sent for Daedalus. Daedalus was not an ordinary man. He was a genius, an inventor, a creator of wonders. He had built statues so lifelike they seemed ready to move. He had designed machines that no one else could understand. His mind saw paths where others saw walls. When he entered the palace, he bowed. "You called for me, my queen." Pasiphae studied him carefully. She hesitated. Even now, speaking her desire felt dangerous, but the curse was stronger than her fear. "I need your help," she said quietly, "and what I ask must never be spoken of." Daedalus raised his head slightly. "I am your servant," he replied. "Tell me what you need." Pasiphae took a breath. Then she told him everything. As she spoke, Daedalus felt a chill run through him. This was no ordinary request. This was something unnatural, something forbidden. "This is the work of a god," he said when she finished. "Yes," Pasiphae replied, "and I cannot escape it." Daedalus was silent. He knew he should refuse. He knew this path would lead to disaster, but he also knew something else. Refusing the Queen of Crete was not without danger, and curiosity. Curiosity had always been his weakness. "I can help you," he said slowly. Pasiphae leaned forward. "How?" Daedalus's mind was already working, turning the impossible into something real. "I will build something," he said. "A device, a form that will allow you to approach the bull without fear." Pasiphae's eyes widened. "You can do this?" "Yes," Daedalus said. And in that moment, the fate of Crete was sealed. Days turned into weeks as Daedalus worked in secret. He gathered wood, tools, and materials. No one knew what he was building. No one asked. Inside his workshop, something strange began to take shape. A hollow structure, carved and shaped with incredible skill, covered in real hide. It looked like a cow, but it was not alive. It was a creation, a deception. When it was finished, Daedalus stood back and looked at it. Even he felt uneasy. "This should not exist," he muttered, but it did, and soon it would be used. Under the cover of night, Pasiphae came to him. "Is it ready?" she asked. Daedalus nodded. "This will allow you to approach the bull," he said. "But once you begin, there is no turning back." Pasiphae did not hesitate. "There was never a choice," she said. Daedalus helped her inside the wooden form. He placed it in the fields where the white bull grazed. Then he stepped back into the shadows and waited. The moon hung high in the sky. The wind was still. The bull approached, and the curse was fulfilled. Time passed, and from that unnatural union, something was born. At first, the palace was filled with whispers, then fear, then silence, because what Pasiphae gave birth to was not human and not beast. It had the body of a man, but the head of a bull. Its eyes were wild, its strength was unnatural, its hunger endless. They called it the Minotaur. When King Minos saw the creature, his face turned pale. "What is this?" he demanded. Pasiphae said nothing. She did not need to. Minos understood. The gods had punished him. And this monster, was the result. "We cannot let this thing live," one of the guards said, gripping his spear tightly. But the Minotaur roared, a sound so powerful it shook the walls. The guards stepped back. Even Minos hesitated, because this was no ordinary creature. It was something beyond them, something that could not be easily destroyed. "What do we do?" Pasiphae asked. Minos did not answer immediately. He looked at the creature, at its strength, its rage, its unnatural existence, and then he made a decision. "We will not kill it," he said slowly. Pasiphae looked at him in surprise. "Then what?" Minos turned to his servants. "Bring Daedalus." When Daedalus arrived, he already knew this would happen. He had felt it coming, the consequences of his creation. Minos stood before him, his expression cold. "You built something impossible once," the king said. "Now you will do it again." Daedalus said nothing. "You will build a prison," Minos continued, "a place from which no one can escape." Daedalus frowned. "For what purpose?" Minos stepped aside and revealed the Minotaur. Even Daedalus, who had seen many strange things, felt fear in that moment. "This creature," Minos said, "must be contained." Daedalus nodded slowly. Yes, it must. But in his heart he knew something else. A prison strong enough to hold such a monster would not be a simple structure. It would need to be something far more complex. A place where direction itself could be lost. A place where even the mind could not find its way out. A maze. No, something greater than a maze. A labyrinth. Daedalus began his work, and what he created would become one of the greatest and most terrifying structures the world had ever seen. A place where people would enter and never return. Part 2. The Labyrinth of Stone. The sea around Crete was calm that morning, as if the whole island held its breath. In the royal workshop, Daedalus stood before a long wooden table covered in drawings. Lines crossed and curved, forming shapes that looked like nothing in the world above. Corridors twisted into dead ends, circles circled circles, and every path seemed to lead away from the center instead of toward it. "This cannot be real," one of the younger builders whispered, staring at the sketches. "No one can find their way through something like this." Daedalus did not look up. "If it were simple," he said quietly, "it would not be enough." Around them, workers lifted stone, carved pathways, and set up the first walls. The smell of dust and crushed limestone filled the air. The sound of hammers echoed softly, like a distant heartbeat. They were building the labyrinth. Deep below the ground, far from the sun, the first tunnels were already taking shape. Stone blocks were stacked in long rows, forming corridors that stretched in every direction. Each turn was carefully measured. Each corner was cut with a slight tilt, so that the light would never quite reveal the full path ahead. From above, the labyrinth looked like a secret pattern pressed into the earth. From inside, it felt like a dream that refused to let anyone wake up. Daedalus walked through the half-built maze alone. He stepped carefully, listening to the echo of his own footsteps. Turn after turn, left after right. Still, he knew the way, because he was the one who had drawn it. "Even the wisest man," he murmured, "will lose himself here sooner or later." He stopped at a wide chamber half built into the mountain. The ceiling above was high, lost in shadow. The walls were smooth, carved into the living rock. Here they would put the Minotaur. Here the monster would live. Daedalus looked around. Already the emptiness felt heavy, as if the place itself was waiting for something. Back in the palace, Pasiphae stood at the window of her room. The sea was calm. The sky was soft blue with a pale morning light. She rested one hand on the stone sill, the other on her chest. The child inside her had grown stronger. It moved almost like a small animal, restless under her skin. She did not smile. She did not cry. She only watched the sea. Somewhere below the palace, the labyrinth was being carved deeper into the mountain, and somewhere inside it, a prison was waiting for the creature she would give birth to. Minos stood in the throne room, speaking to his advisors. "The labyrinth must be finished before the next harvest," he said. "The Minotaur, must be moved there before the full moon. One of the older men bowed his head. "It will be done, my king," he said. "But the people, they whisper." Minos frowned. "What do they whisper about?" "About the bull," the man replied, "about the queen, and about what will happen when the child is born." For a moment, Minos was silent. He looked out the window toward the mountain where the labyrinth was being carved. "The gods gave us this," he said slowly, "and we will deal with it as they wish." The advisors did not argue. They only bowed and left. But the whispers spread anyway. Among the farmers, among the fishers, among the servants, "The queen is cursed," some said in low voices. "The king angered Poseidon," others believed. "Something unnatural will come from that." Many feared. Still, life went on. Weeks passed. The labyrinth grew. The first layers of stone walls were complete. The pathways were long and narrow, lit by small torches that flickered like tiny stars. Guards walked the main corridors, but they moved quickly, avoiding the deeper turns. Even they felt uneasy. The air grew colder the farther they went. The echoes of their voices twisted strangely, as if the walls were listening. Some of them crossed their chest before entering, for protection, for luck, for nothing at all, except fear. Pasiphae felt the weight of time in her body. The child inside her grew heavier. Her movements became slower. She walked through the palace like a ghost, passing gardens and halls as if in a dream. Sometimes she stopped at the edge of a courtyard and looked down toward the mountain. She could not see the labyrinth, but she knew it was there, waiting, preparing. Her hand rested on her belly. "You did not choose this," she whispered, "and neither did I." The child did not answer, but she felt it stir, as if it heard her. One night, the moon hung full and white over Crete. The sea shimmered like silver. The palace was quiet. Only the guards moved through the halls, and a few servants still worked by candlelight. In her chamber, Pasiphae lay awake. The child inside her was restless. She could feel it pressing against her ribs, pushing against her skin. The pain came slowly at first, like distant thunder. Then it grew louder, sharper, until it filled her body. She sat up, her breath short. "Servant," she called, her voice trembling. Footsteps hurried toward the door. The midwives entered quickly, their faces calm but their eyes alert. They helped her lie down again. The night passed in a blur of pain and voices. Pasiphae gripped the sheets, her knuckles white. She did not scream. She only whispered. "Let this be done," she said through gritted teeth. "Let this be over." And then, at last, the child came. The midwives froze when they saw it. The first one took a sharp breath. The second one stepped back without meaning to. The third one closed her eyes, as if by looking away she could pretend it was not real. "It cannot be," the eldest whispered. It was a baby, but it was also something else. The head was that of a bull, strong, broad, with small horns just beginning to grow. The body was human, small and fragile, but with a strange strength in its limbs. The eyes opened, dark and wild, and for a moment they fixed on the midwives. Then the creature cried, not like a human child, not like an animal, somewhere between. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet room. Pasiphae lay still, her chest heaving. When she saw the child, she did not scream. She did not weep. She only stared. Her hand reached out slowly, gently. The creature's eyes turned toward her. For a moment, the two were silent. Then Pasiphae pulled the child closer, wrapping it in soft cloth. "No one," she said quietly, "will ever call you monster." The midwives watched, uneasy. They wanted to argue. They wanted to fear. But they said nothing, because the queen's voice left no room for argument. The next morning, Minos received the news. He stood in the throne room, his face unreadable. "The child is born," the servant said, bowing low. It is as we feared." "And the queen?" Minos asked. "She is weak," the servant replied, "but calm." Minos nodded slowly. "Bring me the child." The servant hesitated. "Sire." "Now," Minos said firmly. The servant returned with the child wrapped in a cloth. Minos took the bundle in his hands and lifted it carefully. The small creature stared up at him with dark, unblinking eyes. The horns were still small, soft, like the beginning of something dangerous. The body was human-shaped, but there was something unnatural in the way it lay still, watching. Minos felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. This creature was not meant to exist, and yet it did. "This is the price of my pride," he said quietly. "Poseidon has spoken." He looked at the servant. "Take the child to the Labyrinth. The Minotaur will live there." The servant swallowed. "But the queen has done her part," Minos said coldly. "Now the gods will decide what happens next." Pasiphae learned of the decision before the child was taken away. She stood in the hall outside her room, her legs still weak, but her posture straight. When the guards came to take the child, she blocked their way. "You will not touch him," she said, her voice low and steady. The lead guard looked at her, his face pained. "Forgive me, my queen," he said. "The king's orders are not all my commands," Pasiphae replied. "I am the mother of this creature. He is both man and beast. He is not a thing to be thrown into the dark." The guards hesitated. They did not want to fight her. They did not want to touch the child, but they also feared the king. Pasiphae stepped closer, holding the child tightly. "I will take him to the labyrinth myself," she said. "If he must live there, at least he will know a mother's hand one last time." The guards looked at each other. Then the lead guard stepped aside. "Let it be done," he murmured. Pasiphae walked through the palace alone, guards following a respectful distance behind her. The child lay in her arms, quiet, as if it trusted her. The sunlight touched her face, warm. She did not look back. When they reached the entrance to the labyrinth, the air grew cooler. The stone doorway was low and dark, leading into a tunnel that swallowed the light. The guards lit a torch and held it out to her. Pasiphae took it without hesitation. The flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She stepped inside. The labyrinth was vast. Even the first corridor felt endless. The walls were tall, smooth, and unpainted. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of dust and stone. The torch's light barely reached the corners, leaving everything half in shadow. Pasiphae walked slowly, holding the child close. Each turn felt the same. Each corridor looked alike. She did not mind. She did not want to leave. She wanted to walk until the world outside no longer mattered. Deeper they went. The sound of their footsteps echoed strangely. The child stirred in her arms, its small head turning, as if it were listening to the maze itself. Pasiphae's breath grew softer. Her heart, which had been heavy for so long, felt lighter here, as if the labyrinth, though built for imprisonment, understood her loneliness. Finally, they reached the center chamber. The walls here were wider, carved into arches that reached high into darkness. The ground was smooth stone, almost like a giant arena. This was where the Minotaur would live. Pasiphae stopped and looked around. The chamber felt empty, peaceful, She stepped in, moving slowly toward the center. The torchlight flickered against the walls, dancing like shadows come to life. She knelt. The child lay in her arms, still watching her. She held him close one last time. "Listen to me," she whispered so softly that the guards could not hear. "You are not a monster because of what you look like. You are not a monster because of what was done to me. You are only a child who was born in a world that did not ask for you." The child did not answer. Pasiphae touched its small horns gently. "You will be afraid," she continued. "You will be angry. You will be lonely. But do not let that turn you into something cruel. Even if the world calls you beast, you must decide what you will become." She kissed its forehead lightly. Then she set the child down on the cold stone. The child lay still, its dark eyes wide. Pasiphae stood. The guards waited at the edge of the chamber, torches burning. They watched her, but they did not move closer. This was a moment only for her and the creature. Pasiphae looked down at the child one last time. "Remember," she whispered, "you are not alone because you are different. You are only alone because they are afraid." She turned and walked away. As she left the labyrinth, the torchlight grew dimmer. The corridors twisted behind her, swallowing the memory of the center chamber. When she finally stepped back into the sunlight, she blinked, as if waking from a dream. The guards followed, closing the heavy stone door to the labyrinth. Inside, the child lay alone in the dark, but the labyrinth was not empty. It never had been. And now it had a new voice, a low, quiet sound, almost like a breath. The Minotaur had begun to live. Days passed. The island returned to the rhythm of ordinary life. Farmers tended their fields. Fishers cast their nets. Servants cleaned the palace. The labyrinth was spoken of less and less, as if people hoped to forget it existed. Only Daedalus entered it now and then, checking the walls, the corners, the torches. Each time he felt the weight of what he had built. "This is not a place of wisdom," he muttered once, walking alone through the center chamber. "It is a place of fear." The Minotaur watched him from the shadows. The creature had grown quickly in the dark, its body stronger, its horns sharper. But it did not attack. It only watched. Daedalus met its gaze once and held it. "You are not the only one trapped here," he said quietly. The Minotaur did not answer, but something in its eyes softened. Back in the palace, Minos sat at the long table, eating quietly. The news from abroad had come. Athens, the city across the sea, had wronged Crete. A war, a conflict, a slay of a prince. The gods of justice had demanded blood, and now Athens would pay. Minos listened to the messenger. "So," he said slowly, "they will send..." "What?" "7 youths and 7 maidens," the messenger replied. "Every 9 years, as long as this curse is not broken." Minos nodded. "Then that is how it will be." The messenger bowed. "Shall I tell them the labyrinth awaits?" Minos's eyes were cold. "Tell them," he said, "that the Minotaur will be waiting." Part 3. The tribute from Athens. The sea between Crete and Athens was not kind that year. Waves crashed against the cliffs, and the wind howled through the narrow streets of the city. The people of Athens moved quickly, their faces tense, their voices low. They knew what was coming. The messengers had arrived days ago, their sails white against the gray sky. They carried the seal of King Minos. No one opposed them. No one even dared to speak loudly while they walked through the marketplace. The decree was simple. Athens had killed the son of Minos, and so Athens would pay. Not with gold, not with land, but with blood. Every 9 years, the city would send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. They would sail across the sea, land at the harbor of Knossos, and be brought before the king. And then they would be taken to the Labyrinth. No one who entered ever came back. Among the people of Athens, fear spread like smoke in a closed room. Mothers held their children closer at night. Fathers checked the doors and windows, even though they knew it would not matter. The elders sat in the council hall, their brows deep, their voices heavy. "We cannot refuse," one of them said, staring at the wooden table between them. "If we break the oath, war will come. Minos has ships, he has soldiers, he has the favor of the gods." Another elder sighed. "And if we obey," he said, "we send our children to a monster." Silence filled the room. No one had an answer, because there was no answer. Only a choice between 2 kinds of suffering. In a quiet corner of the city, by the edge of the sea, a young man named Theseus sat on the rocks. The wind tugged at his dark hair. The waves crashed against the stones below, sending up cold spray. He watched the horizon, where the island of Crete would be if the mist had not hidden it. 7 men, he said under his breath, and 7 women. Every 9 years. He clenched his fist. His father was dead. His mother had told him only this, that he was not an ordinary boy, that his true father was someone far greater than any king. He did not know who that father was, but he knew this. He did not want to live in a city that bowed to monsters. That evening, Theseus walked through the streets of Athens. The city was quieter than usual. Torches flickered in doorways, and the scent of herbs and bread drifted from open windows. Children ran past, unaware of what was coming, laughing in the fading light. Theseus paused at the entrance of the central square. The elders had gathered there. Men in long robes sat on stone benches, their heads bent over a scroll. The decree lay between them. Around them, a small crowd had gathered, men, women, and older children, all listening in silence. The oldest elder stood and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "By the order of King Minos," he said, "Athens must send 7 youths and 7 maidens to Crete. They will be chosen by lot, as the gods have agreed. No family may refuse." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people stepped back. Others clenched their fists. A few mothers looked away, their eyes wet. Theseus pushed forward until he stood at the edge of the circle. "I will go," he said. The crowd turned toward him. The elders stared. "You?" one of them asked. "Who are you to offer yourself?" Theseus lifted his chin. "My name is Theseus," he said, "and I am not afraid of your king's monster." The elders looked at each other, unsure. "You speak like a child," one said quietly. "Then send a child," Theseus replied, "if no one else is brave enough." Silence fell again. The oldest elder sighed. "The lot will decide," he said at last. "But if the gods place your name among the chosen, you will go with the others." Theseus nodded. "I will not run," he said. The crowd parted as he stepped back. Behind him, whispers followed. "Who is that boy? He looks like a fighter. He will not survive the labyrinth." Theseus pretended not to hear. Inside, his heart pounded, not from fear, from hope, because deep down he believed something impossible. He believed he could face the Minotaur, and he believed he could come back. Days passed. The city prepared. The chosen youths were gathered in a quiet hall near the harbor. 7 young men, 7 young women. They stood in a circle, their eyes tired, their faces pale. Theseus stood among them. He was taller than most, with strong shoulders and a steady gaze. His hair was dark, his skin sun-touched. He wore a simple tunic tied with a leather belt. The others watched him, some with curiosity, some with doubt. One of the young men, a boy with short curly hair and a nervous smile, approached him. "My name is Karen," he said. I don't know why they picked me. I can barely swim." Theseus looked at him. "You're here," he said. "That means the lot chose you. No one can change that." Karen swallowed. "But the Labyrinth, they say it eats people. The Minotaur eats them." Theseus crossed his arms. "Then we will not let it eat us," he said. Karen blinked. "You sound sure," he said. Theseus did not smile. "I am not sure," he admitted, "but I know this. If we stay here and do nothing, we die anyway. At least in the Labyrinth, we still have a chance." Charon nodded slowly, as if he wanted to believe it. Behind them, one of the maidens stepped closer. Her name was Leia. She was tall, with dark braided hair and a calm face, though her hands trembled slightly. "The elders say the Labyrinth has no maps," she said quietly. "No one who enters ever finds the way out." Theseus looked at her. "Then we will not need a map," he said. Leia frowned. "How can you know that?" Theseus glanced down at his hands, as if searching for words. "Because if the gods truly want us to die," he said, "they would not have sent me here." The others watched him, unsure. They were not sure he was brave. They were not sure he was foolish. They only knew one thing. He was the only one who spoke of hope. The day of departure arrived. The ship waited at the harbor, its sails rolled up, its deck crowded with guards and attendants. The chosen youths walked slowly toward it, their steps heavy. The elders stood at the edge of the dock, their heads bowed. The sea was calm, almost too calm, as if the world itself held its breath. Theseus walked at the front of the group, his jaw tight. Behind him, 7 young men and 7 young women followed in silence. Among them, Karen kept glancing at the water, as if he expected it to swallow him. Leia walked with her back straight, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The ship's captain, a tall man with salt-streaked hair and a scar across his cheek, waited at the plank. "The king of Minos expects you before the full moon," he said. "Do not make us late." Theseus climbed onto the deck first. The wood creaked under his feet. The guards followed, then the youths. The plank was lifted. The sails were raised. The ship slowly pulled away from the dock. Athens vanished behind them, growing smaller and smaller, until it was only a line of houses against the shore. The sea widened. The wind grew stronger. The journey had begun. For days they sailed. The sun rose and set over the endless water. The stars blinked above at night like tiny eyes watching them. The youths slept in cramped quarters below deck, wrapped in thin blankets, their bodies swaying with the motion of the ship. Sometimes they talked in whispers, about home, about food, about the unknown waiting across the sea. Karen often sat at the edge of the deck, looking down at the waves. "What if there is no way out?" he asked one evening, his voice small. "What if we just walk until we die of hunger?" Leia sat beside him, wrapped in a shawl. "The elders said the Minotaur kills quickly," she replied. "At least we will not starve." That did not comfort him. Theseus stood a little farther away, staring at the horizon. He did not speak much, but he watched everything. The way the guards moved, the way the sailors handled the sails, the way the light changed as the sun lowered. He searched for patterns, for signs, for anything that could help him later. He did not know how, he only knew he must be ready. At last the island of Crete appeared. First, it was only a shadow on the horizon, a dark line above the sea. Then the cliffs grew clearer, the shore wider, the palace higher. The ship sailed toward the harbor of Knossos. The water grew calm, the wind softened. The air smelled of salt and warm stone. The harbor was crowded with ships. Flags of different colors snapped in the breeze. Men called to each other, their voices echoing off the high walls. The Athenian ship docked slowly. The plank was lowered. The guards stepped off first, then the youths. Theseus was the last to leave the ship. His feet touched the stone dock. For a moment he stood still, feeling the solid ground beneath him. The city of Knossos rose around him, its white and beige buildings shining in the sunlight. The palace of Minos stood above it all, its walls smooth and tall, its columns thin and graceful. Theseus took a breath. "So this is Crete," he said under his breath. A hand touched his shoulder. He turned. It was an Athenian guard, older, with tired eyes. "Do not speak," the man whispered. "Not here." Theseus nodded. The group was marched through the streets. People watched them from doorways. Some stared, some whispered, some looked away. They reached the palace steps. The air here was cooler, the stones whiter. At the top of the stairs, a man waited. He was tall. His hair was black with a hint of silver. His eyes were sharp, like a hawk's. His robe was dark, almost the color of the sea at night. King Minos. The youths bowed as they were told. Theseus bowed last, his eyes lifting slowly to meet the king's. For a moment they looked at each other. Minos studied him. Theseus did not look away. "You are the one who volunteered?" Minos asked at last. "Yes," Theseus said. Minos's lips curved, but it was not a warm smile. "Brave words," he said. "We will see if they last in the dark." He turned slightly, his gaze moving over the 7 youths. "You will be taken to the labyrinth at dawn," he said. "Until then, you will rest. You will eat. You will pray if you believe in anything. And when you enter the maze, you will not forget one thing." He paused, his voice dropping. "You will never come out." The youths swallowed. The gods led them away. Theseus walked between them, his jaw tight. Inside, his mind turned. The labyrinth, the Minotaur, the chance. He did not know what would happen, but he knew this. If he was going to die, he would not die afraid. That night, the palace was quiet. The Athenian youths were given a small room with soft beds, simple food, and water in clay cups. The guards sat outside the door, their weapons at their sides. The youths lay on the beds, many of them awake, staring at the ceiling. Charon sat on the edge of his bed, his legs pulled close. "I do not want to die," he whispered. Leia turned toward him, her eyes soft. "None of us do," she said. Theseus stood at the window, looking out at the dark garden below. The moon hung high, pale, and quiet. He saw movement in the shadows. A figure slipped along the edge of the palace wall, dressed in a light robe, her hair covered by a thin veil. She stopped under his window. For a moment she looked up. Their eyes met. Theseus froze. She lifted a finger to her lips, as if telling him to be silent. Then she pointed toward the palace, as if inviting him to follow. Theseus hesitated. He looked back at the room. The others were watching him. Leia's eyes widened slightly. Charon frowned. "What?" he asked quietly. "Who is that?" Theseus did not answer. He stepped back from the window, his heart beating faster. Something inside him whispered, "This is the first sign, the first chance." He did not know who she was, but he knew one thing. If he was going to survive the labyrinth, he could not wait for the morning. He had to start now. Part 4. The Thread in the Dark. The night in the palace of Knossos was quiet. The stars hung above the sea like tiny silver eyes. The torches along the walls of the courtyard flickered softly, their light barely touching the stone. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then fell silent. In a small side room, Theseus lay awake on a thin mattress, his hands behind his head. He had not gone to sleep. The figure at the window still lingered in his mind. The girl in the pale robe, the finger on her lips, the silent invitation. He could not ignore it. "Karen," he whispered. The boy next to him, curled under a thin blanket, groaned softly. "Not now," he mumbled. "Theseus, please. I'm trying to pretend this is not happening." Theseus sat up slowly. "It is happening," he said quietly. "And if I want to live through it, I have to act before the sun rises." Karen opened one eye, looking at him in the dark. "You are going out there?" he asked, his voice tight. "If someone is offering help," Theseus replied, "I would be a fool to wait for morning." Karen pushed himself up onto his elbows. "What if it's a trap?" he asked. "What if it's one of Minos's tricks?" Theseus got to his feet, moving silently so the creaking floorboard under his mattress would not wake the others. "Then I will know quickly," he said, "but I would rather take one risk in the dark than walk blind into the labyrinth." Leia stirred on the other side of the room, half waking. "Are you doing something foolish?" she asked, her voice drowsy. "Probably," Theseus admitted, "but necessary." He stepped toward the door, careful not to trip over the feet of the others. "The door is locked," Karen whispered. Theseus stopped, then he smiled faintly. "Not from the inside," he said. He turned the wooden bolt quietly, the sound almost lost in the silence of the night. The door opened a crack, cool air slipping in from the corridor. He slipped out. The corridor outside was dim. A single oil lamp burned at the far end, its flame small and steady. The stone walls were beige, cool to the touch. The floor was smooth, worn by many feet. Theseus walked slowly, his bare feet almost silent. The girl at the window had gone left, toward the gardens. He followed the same direction. The palace seemed larger at night. The corridors branched in ways they had not during the day. Each turn looked the same as the last. But Theseus kept going, listening, watching, feeling his way through the dark. At last he reached a small archway leading into the palace gardens. The air changed. The salty sea breeze met the soft scent of herbs and flowers. The moon stood high, its pale light washing over the stone paths and low hedges. In the center, by a small fountain, a figure waited. The same girl. She turned as he approached, her eyes calm. She wore a light, pale blue robe, belted at the waist with a simple cord. Her hair was tied back, but a few strands had escaped and danced in the wind. "Theseus of Athens," she said softly. Theseus tried to keep his voice low. "You know my name," he said. "I do not know yours." She smiled slightly. "My name is Ariadne," she said. "I am the daughter of King Minos." Theseus froze. Daughter of the king? His mind raced. He did not know what to expect. Anger, mockery, a trap. But Ariadne's face was calm, almost kind. "You are the one who volunteered to go to the labyrinth," she said. "They told me you spoke of hope." Theseus nodded slowly. "I still do," he said. "That is why I came here tonight." Ariadne looked away for a moment, toward the dark pool of the fountain. "The labyrinth," she said quietly, "is not a place of hope. It is a prison built for the Minotaur, and for anyone who enters it." Theseus met her eyes. "Then why are you talking to me?" he asked. Ariadne's lips pressed together. "Because I do not want to see you die," she said. "And I do not want to see the people of Athens suffer any longer." Theseus frowned. "You say want," he said, "but your father seems to want exactly that." Ariadne nodded, a shadow passing over her face. "My father," she said, "acts like a king, not like a man who remembers what it is to feel fear." She stepped closer. "I have watched the labyrinth grow," she continued. "I have listened to the builders whisper about its turns. I have studied the way the torches are placed, the way the walls twist, and I have learned one thing." Her voice dropped lower. "It is possible to leave a trail." Theseus felt his heart beat faster. "How?" he asked. Ariadne reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small ball of thread. The thread was soft, spun from pale wool, almost the color of the moon. "It is not much," she said, holding it out to him, "but it is enough." Theseus took it carefully. The thread felt lighter than he expected. "What is this?" he asked. "A guide," Ariadne replied. "You will tie one end to the entrance. Then, as you walk deeper into the labyrinth, you will unwind it behind you. The thread will remember each turn. When it is time to leave, you will follow it back." Theseus turned the ball in his hand, feeling the smooth texture of the wool. "A simple thing," he said, "for a place so complex." Ariadne nodded. "Simple," she said, "but not easy. The labyrinth is built to confuse the mind. In the dark, it is easy to forget right from left, forward from back. The thread will not stop the fear. It will only show the way." Theseus looked at her. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "You are the king's daughter. Should you not be on his side?" Ariadne's eyes darkened. "I am on no one's side," she said. "I am only a person who has seen too much. I have watched my father's pride twist into cruelty. I have heard the rumors of the Minotaur long before it was born. And I have listened to the stories of the youths who came before you and never returned." She looked at the ball of thread in his hand. "Someone must break the cycle," she said. "Maybe it is you. Maybe it is not. But I will not stand by and do nothing." Theseus studied her face. She was not smiling, but there was something steady in her gaze. "Then we will try," he said quietly. Ariadne reached into her robe again and pulled out a small knife, its handle wrapped in worn leather. "This," she said, "may be needed where the thread fails." Theseus took the knife. It felt heavier than the thread, solid, cold. He looked at Ariadne one last time. "If I do not return," he said, "you will not hear of me again." Ariadne nodded. "But if you do," she replied, "tell the world what you saw. Tell them that the labyrinth is real and that the Minotaur is not a lie." Theseus turned the knife in his hand. "I will," he said, "if I live." He stepped back toward the archway. "I should go before someone sees me." Ariadne watched him. "Be careful in the dark," she said. "The labyrinth does not forgive hesitation." Theseus nodded once. Then he disappeared into the shadow of the corridor. Dawn came slowly to Knossos. The sky in the east turned pale pink, then soft gold, then bright blue. The sea shimmered below the cliffs. The city stirred. Birds called from the rooftops. In the palace courtyard, the guards lined up. The Athenian youths were led out of their room, their eyes red from lack of sleep, their faces pale. Theseus walked with them, the ball of thread and the small knife hidden in the folds of his tunic. The thread pressed against his chest, a quiet weight. The knife lay cold against his side. He did not look at King Minos when he stepped into the courtyard. He looked only at the stone path ahead. toward the labyrinth. The crowd gathered, not many, but enough. Servants, guards, a few curious onlookers stood near the edges, their eyes fixed on the youths. At the top of the steps, King Minos stood once again, his dark robe flowing in the morning breeze. "Today," he said, his voice carrying across the stone, "the lost will meet the labyrinth, the brave will meet the Minotaur, and the gods will decide who returns." He turned his gaze toward the youths. "These are the chosen," he said. "They come from Athens, the city that broke its oath. They will walk the maze. They will find the center. They will face our guest." The word guest was heavy, almost mocking. Theseus's jaw tightened, but he did not react. Among the onlookers, Ariadne stood slightly apart, her face calm, her eyes fixed on him. She did not speak, but Theseus felt her watching. The guards led the group down the long stone road toward the mountain. The path wound upward, carved into the rock. The labyrinth's entrance lay at the base of the mountain, a dark stone doorway framed by rough-hewn pillars. The air grew cooler. The sound of the sea faded. The only noise now was the shuffle of their feet, the breathing of the youths, and the steady clinking of the guards' armor. Charon walked beside Theseus, his hands clenched into fists. "I cannot breathe," he whispered. "Then breathe slowly," Theseus replied. "You'll need your breath inside." Leia walked a little ahead, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the dark doorway. The entrance to the labyrinth looked like a mouth in the stone, high, wide, and dark. The torches that lined the walls flickered faintly, casting long shadows. The guards stopped at the entrance. "Here," one of them said, "you will go in alone. We will not follow." Theseus stepped forward. "What about the others?" he asked. The guard's gaze did not soften. "They will follow when you are deep enough," he said. "If you survive the first turns, they may find you." Theseus did not argue. "Then I will go first," he said. He walked toward the entrance. The darkness inside swallowed the light. The air felt cool, damp. He stopped at the edge. Then he reached into his tunic and pulled out the ball of thread. With steady hands, he tied one end to the stone pillar beside the doorway. The thread held. He looked back once. The guards watched, stern. The Athenians stared, their eyes wide. Ariadne's face was blurry in the distance. Theseus turned away. He stepped into the labyrinth. Inside, the world changed. The sunlight vanished. The sky disappeared. The stone walls rose on both sides, tall, smooth, and pale yellow in the torchlight. The air smelled of dust and old stone. The echoes of his footsteps bounced off the walls, twisting, so he could not always tell where the sound came from. He walked slowly, left hand brushing the wall, right hand holding the ball of thread. Each turn he took, he released a little more wool. Left, right, straight. The longer he walked, the stranger it felt. The corridors looked the same. The torches burned in the same places. The stone did not change. After a while, he could not remember how many turns he had taken. Only the thread in his hand reminded him. He stopped at a fork in the path. 2 corridors stretched ahead of him, both lit by the same faint golden light. He looked left. He looked right. Then he checked the thread in his hand. It felt steady, solid. He chose the left path. Deeper he went. The air grew cooler, the silence heavier. Sometimes he thought he heard something moving in the distance, a low sound, almost like breathing. But when he paused, it faded. He continued. His heart pounded, but he kept walking. At a long, straight hall, he finally saw the first sign that not all corridors were the same. In the wall to his left, a small crack let in a thin line of daylight. It fell across the stone like a bright ribbon. The light did not touch the opposite wall. The crack was high, narrow, almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. Theseus stopped. He studied the crack, then the floor, then the torch in the wall a few steps ahead. Someone had placed it there on purpose. Someone who knew this maze. He felt a strange calm spread over him. He was not alone in here. The labyrinth may have been built to trap, but it had also been studied. Someone had noticed these small details. Perhaps Ariadne, perhaps others. He pressed his hand against the wall beside the crack and felt the grain of the stone. Then he continued, the thread slipping smooth through his fingers. Another fork, another choice. Left again. The path narrowed slightly. The walls drew closer. The torches were spaced farther apart, so the darkness between them grew longer. The air felt colder. Theseus's breath came out in small clouds. He checked the thread again. It lay behind him like a thin line of pale light, weaving between the stone. He counted his steps in his head, marking each in his memory. 100, 200, 300. At some point the numbers blurred, but he kept going. Then he heard it, a low sound, different from before, not just breathing, a growl, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the stone itself. Theseus froze. His hand tightened around the thread. The sound grew louder. Something was moving ahead. The corridor curved into darkness, torchlight barely reaching the bend. Theseus stepped slowly, keeping his hand on the wall, the thread still in his other hand. Around the bend, the corridor opened into a wider chamber. The walls were smoother, the ceiling higher. Torches burned in even circles, their light flickering. In the center, something moved. It was tall, powerful. The body was human-shaped, but the head was that of a bull. Its horns curved like crescents, heavy and sharp. Its eyes glowed in the torchlight, dark and wild. The Minotaur stood still, its massive shoulders rising with each breath. It turned its head slowly. It saw Theseus. For a moment, the world was silent. Then the Minotaur lowered its head slightly. The gesture was not friendly. It was not hostile. It was curious. Theseus swallowed but did not look away. "I am Theseus of Athens," he said, his voice low but steady. "I did not come to kill you." The Minotaur did not answer. It did not need to. It only stared. Charon and the others entered the labyrinth some time later, separated and guided by the guards' voices. The first turns felt like a dream. Left, right, left. The walls seemed to breathe. The torchlight flickered like distant stars. Charon whispered prayers under his breath. Leia walked as if she were walking in the daylight, keeping her back straight, her eyes searching the walls. They called to each other now and then, their voices echoing strangely. "Are you there?" "Right here." But the sound twisted, so sometimes it felt like they were calling from the opposite side of the maze. Eventually, they reached a junction where 3 corridors met. They stopped, looking at each other. "This is wrong," Leia said. "We were supposed to stay together." "They pushed us apart," Charon muttered. "They said we would find each other again deeper inside." Leia pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the soft fabric of her tunic. There was something small beneath it, a thin strip of cloth. Ariadne had slipped it to her just before they left the palace, her eyes calm, her fingers steady. "When you feel lost," the princess had told her, "hold this. It will remind you that you are not alone." Leia did not know what it meant, but now, in the dark, Her fingers closed over the cloth, the thread in Theseus's hand, the cloth in Leia's pocket. The labyrinth did not know their names, but someone had decided that they would not walk it blindly. Theseus stood in the Minotaur's chamber, the thread stretching back behind him like a fragile line of light. The Minotaur watched him. The hero watched the beast. The torches flickered. The air grew heavier. The moments stretched. Who would move first? Would Theseus raise the knife? Would the Minotaur charge? Or would they simply stand, staring at the strange reality of each other? A man who walked into the labyrinth on purpose, and a creature who had never been given a choice. Part 5. The choice in the center. The chamber was silent. The torches burned in their stone holders, sending rings of light over the smooth walls. The stone floor felt cold under Theseus's feet. The air hung heavy, as if the maze itself were holding its breath. The Minotaur did not move. It stood in the center, massive and strange, its horns curving like crescents above its broad head. Its eyes were dark, but they did not hold the blind rage that Theseus had expected. They held something quieter, something older. Theseus did not raise the knife. He did not step back. He only looked at the creature and said, "I did not come to kill you." The Minotaur's nostrils flared. It lowered its head slightly, the way a beast might when it is not sure whether it faces a threat or a stranger. "You are not like the others," the Minotaur said at last. The voice was deep, rough, and slow, like stone sliding over stone. Theseus blinked, surprised. "I thought you could not speak," he said. The Minotaur's eyes narrowed. "I have not had anyone to speak to," it replied. "The labyrinth is quiet. The walls are walls. The dark is the same, whether I scream or stay silent." Theseus let the knife rest in his hand, not raised, not lowered. "They send people here," he said, over and over, "to die." The Minotaur nodded once. "Yes," it said, "they call it a trial. They say I am the test, but I am only the one left standing when the silence returns." Theseus looked at the thread in his other hand. The thin white line stretched back behind him, leading into the dark, like a fragile memory of the way out. "The thread," he said. "It is not just for me." The Minotaur followed his gaze, but did not understand at first. "There are others," Theseus continued, "youths from Athens. They walk the labyrinth now, afraid, confused. They do not know if they will find me, if they will find you." The Minotaur's eyes shifted. "Then they are already lost," it said. "The labyrinth does not change for hope." Theseus took a step closer, not threatening, not attacking. "No," he said, "the labyrinth does not change. But we can." The Minotaur watched him. "You talk like a man who has never been caged," it said. "I have never been caged like this," Theseus replied, "but I have felt the weight of other chains, fear, fate, the expectations of a city that does not know me." The Minotaur's lips pulled back slightly, as if it almost smiled. "You are strange," it said. "You walk into death, carry a thread as if it were a weapon, and tell me we can change things." Theseus looked at the knife, then at the thread. "The knife is a last choice," he said. "The thread is a first. I came here to find a way out, not just for me, but for all of us." The Minotaur exhaled slowly. The sound echoed off the walls. "If you are here for them," it said, "then you are not here for me." Theseus hesitated. "That is not true," he said. "I am here for all of us, even you." The Minotaur's eyes hardened slightly. "You do not know what I am," it said. "You do not know what was done to bring me here." "I know enough," Theseus replied. I know that you were born in this place, and that you never asked for it. I know that the king of Crete built this maze to hide you, not to free you. The Minotaur's fists clenched, but it did not move. It is the only home I have known, it said. The only voice I have heard is my own. The only sound is the echo of those who run, scream, or fall. Theseus took another step, closing the distance just enough to speak softly. And now, he said, there is my voice and yours. The Minotaur's eyes flickered, as if something inside it shifted. You are not like the others, it said again, slower this time. Theseus nodded. No, he said, I am not. That is why I brought this. He held up the thread. The thin white wool glowed faintly in the torchlight, almost like a soft rope of light. The thread will lead me back, he said, and I will lead the others with me. If I am to leave the labyrinth alive, I will not leave it alone. The Minotaur frowned. What are you offering? It asked. A choice, Theseus replied. Stay here, in this chamber, or try something different. The Minotaur let out a low sound, almost a laugh. Different, it said. The labyrinth is the same. The walls do not move. The doors are all closed. Theseus shook his head. The labyrinth is the same, he said, but the way we move through it can change. If I follow the thread, I can lead others out. If you stand aside, they may not need to die. The Minotaur's eyes narrowed. You think I choose who dies? It asked. Theseus did not look away. I think you could choose, he said. I think you could choose not to chase them, not to feed on fear, to let them pass. The Minotaur's chest rose and fell. The silence stretched. Then the creature asked, and what if I refuse? What if I do not care what happens to them? What happens to you? Theseus's fingers tightened around the knife for a moment. Then he loosened his grip. If that is truly what you want, he said, then I will do what I must. I will fight. I will try to kill you, and I may fail, or I may succeed, but I will not pretend this is the only way you can be. The Minotaur watched him. You speak as if you have already decided something, it said. Theseus nodded. I have, he said. I decided long before I stepped into this maze that I would not die like a sheep led to slaughter. And I decided that if I survive, I will not leave behind the same fear that brought me here. The Minotaur's eyes softened, just a little. Then tell me, it said, how you plan to lead them out. How can you make the labyrinth give them back? Theseus lifted the thread again. By remembering the path, he said. The thread will record every turn, every crossing, every dead end we avoided. When they follow me, they will not see the maze as a monster. They will see it as a path written down in wool. The Minotaur studied the thread, then Theseus. And you will not abandon them? It asked. Theseus met its gaze. No, he said, they are not sacrifices. They are not food. They are people. And if I can help them, I will. The Minotaur exhaled slowly, as if releasing something heavy. You are either very brave, it said, or very foolish. Theseus smiled faintly. Perhaps both, he replied. For a moment the chamber felt lighter. The shadows on the walls seemed softer. The torches flickered gently, as if the air itself had shifted. Then the Minotaur said, Go. Lead them. Let them see that the labyrinth can be walked through with something more than terror. Theseus hesitated. Will you stay here? He asked. The Minotaur nodded once. This is my place, it said. Your path begins elsewhere. Mine has always been here. Theseus bowed his head slightly. Then I will not forget you, he said. If anyone asks why the labyrinth no longer kills everyone, I will tell them that the Minotaur chose to let them pass. The Minotaur's eyes held his for a moment longer. "Go," it said again. "The thread will not wait." In another corridor, Charon stumbled against the stone wall. The torchlight flickered, casting his shadow long and thin on the floor. "We were supposed to be together," he muttered. "We were supposed to walk in a line so we could see each other." But the guards had pushed them apart, one by one, until they disappeared into different turns. Now there was only echo, and breath, and the sound of stone. "Leia," Charon called, his voice shaking. "Theseus." The maze twisted his words. It repeated them, softer, fainter, until they sounded like someone else's voice. Charon pressed his hand against the wall, trying to steady himself. His heart pounded. He had never been good in the dark. He had never been good under pressure. He had only been good at laughing to hide fear. But now there was no one to pretend for. "Please," he whispered, though he did not know who he was asking. "Please, let there be a way out." As if in answer, he felt something strange under his fingers, a thin line. He pressed harder. It was soft. He pulled. The thread, white thread, barely visible in the dim light, running along the wall, unbroken, leading back into the maze. Charon stared at it. His breath caught. He looked at the stone around him. The thread ran along the wall, following the curve of the corridor, as if someone had laid it there on purpose. "Someone left this," he whispered. He followed it with his eyes. It turned at the next corner. He turned with it. The corridor opened into a wider passage. There, in the faint light, he saw a shape moving toward him. It was Theseus. Charon's legs almost failed him. "Theseus!" he cried, his voice breaking. Theseus stopped, his eyes scanning the corridor. When he saw Charon, he exhaled slowly. "You found it," he said, his voice low with relief. Charon ran toward him, clutching the thread in his hand. "The thread," he said. "I felt it on the wall. It was guiding me." Theseus nodded, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "It is guiding us," he said. "Follow it and don't let go." Charon swallowed. "What about the others?" he asked. "Leia, the rest?" Theseus looked down the corridor toward the deeper darkness. "I will find them," he said. "If they listen to the maze, if they trust it even a little, they will feel the thread too." Leia walked through another chamber, her fingers pressed against the thin strip of cloth Ariadne had given her. The corridor before her branched into 3 paths. The torches flickered, their light uneven. The walls looked the same. The stone felt the same. Her heart beat steadily, but her thoughts raced. "This is where they would panic," she said quietly. "This is where they would turn back and try again and again until they forgot where they started." She pressed the cloth against her chest again. Ariadne's voice echoed in her memory. "When you feel lost, hold this. It will remind you that you are not alone." Leia took a breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of the stone, the slow echo of her own breath. Then she opened her eyes and looked at the floor. There, almost hidden by shadow, was a thin white line. The thread. It ran from one path into another, turning at the edge of the floor, almost invisible in the dim light. Leia knelt. Her fingers brushed it. It was real. She followed it with her eyes. The thread led left. She did not hesitate. She stepped onto the left path, trailing her hand along the wall, following the line of wool as if it were a rope in the dark. The farther she walked, the clearer it became. The thread led her through another turn, then another. then into a long, straight passage. The air grew warmer, the torches glowed brighter. At the end of the passage, a figure stepped out of the shadow. Theseus. Leia's shoulders relaxed slightly. "You were right," she said. "The thread does not lie." Theseus smiled, a small, tired smile. "It is only a tool," he replied. "The maze still lies. But now we have a way to answer it." Leia fell into step beside him. "How many paths have you walked?" she asked. Theseus glanced at the thread in his hand. "Too many to count," he said. "But the thread remembers them all." Deeper in the maze, Minos waited. He stood at the edge of a high stone balcony carved into the mountainside, overlooking the dark entrance of the labyrinth. The sun was high above the sea, its light warm and golden, but the balcony felt cold. The king's robe flapped slightly in the breeze. He watched the stone doorway, as if waiting for something. A guard approached, his steps careful. "The youths entered at dawn," the man said. "They have been in the labyrinth for some time now." Minos did not look at him. "How long does it usually take?" he asked, his voice low. The guard hesitated. "For most of them," he said. "The sounds stop by midday. The maze is quiet again by evening." Minos' jaw tightened. "And the Minotaur?" he asked. The guard swallowed. "It is, as always," he said. "The labyrinth keeps its secrets." Minos pressed his hand against the stone railing. "Today," he said, "will be different." The guard frowned. "Sire?" Minos' eyes narrowed slightly. "Today," he repeated, "someone walks the labyrinth who did not come to die." The guard looked at the doorway, then back at the king. "But that is impossible," he said softly. "The labyrinth was built to be impossible to leave." Minos' lips curved faintly, but there was no warmth in the smile. "Then we will see," he said, "what happens when the impossible walks anyway." In another corridor, the last few Athenian youths gathered. They had followed the thread blindly, not knowing where it would lead, only that it felt like the first real sign of sense in an endless maze. Now they stood together, their faces pale, but their eyes alight. The thread ran from each of their hands, pulled taut, leading forward. Theseus stood at the front. "We are close," he said, his voice calm. "The thread is not stopping. The maze is not closing. That means we are near the way out." Charon looked at him, his hands almost shaking. "What if it leads to the Minotaur instead?" he asked. Theseus met his gaze. "Then we will face it," he said, "but not blindly, not afraid. If we must fight, we will fight with our minds as much as our hands." Leia touched the small cloth beneath her tunic again. "Then we are ready," she said quietly. Theseus nodded. "Follow me," he said. "Stay close. Listen to each other. Remember every step, because if the thread should break, you will have to remember the path yourselves." The youths tightened their grips on the thread and stepped forward. The corridor opened ahead, the torchlight brighter, the walls smoother. The air felt lighter. The maze felt aware, as if it knew they were walking toward the end. The chamber of the Minotaur faded behind Theseus in memory. The beast had stayed. It had chosen silence. It had chosen to let them pass. The thread did not lie. The path did not twist back on itself. The maze led them outward, following the line of wool back through the turns, retracing the steps Theseus had taken alone. With every step, the youths grew steadier. Their fear did not vanish, but it was no longer total. They began to count their steps. They began to trust the rhythm of the stone. They began to believe that the labyrinth was not a living thing that hated them. It was only a place built by a man who had tried to hide something too terrible to face. And now, guided by a thread and a choice, that place was opening its way. When Theseus stepped into the light again, the world felt too bright. The stone doorway of the labyrinth glowed gold in the afternoon sun. The air outside was warm, salty, alive. The sea whispered in the distance. The youths emerged behind him one by one, blinking against the light, their breath fast, but their eyes wide with disbelief. Minos still stood at the edge of the balcony, watching. His face was unreadable. The Athenian guards froze, their weapons half raised, unsure what to do. The crowd that had gathered earlier stared. Someone gasped. Someone whispered. Someone refused to believe it. Theseus stepped fully out of the doorway, the thread still in his hand, the knife at his side, the cloth Ariadne had given him stained with dust and sweat. He looked up at the balcony. King Minos looked down. "You walked through the labyrinth," the king said slowly, "and came back." Theseus nodded. "We did," he said, "not by force alone, but by remembering the path." Minos's eyes narrowed. "There has never been a survivor," he said. "The maze devours them all." Theseus lifted the thread slightly. "Then your maze met someone who refused to be devoured," he replied. "We did not walk blindly. We walked with this." The crowd murmured. Some of them looked at the thread, baffled. Some of them looked at the youths, amazed. Charon stumbled slightly, his legs weak from the long walk, but he smiled anyway. "Theseus did not kill the Minotaur," he said, his voice shaking. "We walked past it. It let us go." The words spread like water through the square. The Minotaur had let them pass? The king's face darkened. "That is impossible," he said, his voice firmer. "The monster is without mercy." Theseus met his gaze again. "Then perhaps you were wrong about more than the maze," he said. The Athenians fell silent. The Cretans fell silent. For a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. Then Ariadne stepped forward, her robe fluttering in the breeze. She stood at the edge of the balcony, not beside her father, but slightly apart. Theseus looked at her. She did not smile, but her eyes held his steady and calm. "It is possible," she said, her voice clear, "for even the most impossible place to change, if the people who walk it refuse to walk blindly." The crowd shifted. The elders in Athens would talk of this for years. The sailors would whisper of a thread that led through the dark. The children would grow up hearing the story of the youth who did not die in the labyrinth, but returned. And the Minotaur? No one. Part 6. The Return Across the Sea. The sun hung over the sea like a slow golden coin as the Cretan ship pulled away from the harbor of Knossos. The stone docks faded behind it, the palace growing smaller, the cliffs turning into a pale line along the horizon. The wind carried the faint scent of warm stone and salt, and the waves beat softly against the hull. On the deck, the Athenian youths stood in a tight circle, their eyes wide, their hands resting on the rail, as if to make sure the world was still real. The king's guards watched them from the far end of the deck, their faces stiff, their hands near their weapons, but they did not approach. The voyage was not a celebration. It was a question. One people had walked into the labyrinth. They had come out. No one in Crete had seen the like before, and no one knew what to say. Theseus stood at the prow of the ship, his back straight, his hands gripping the wood of the rail. The sea spread out before him, pale blue and sparkling, like a vast open maze with no walls, only sky and water. The wind pulled at his hair, carrying away the last traces of stone dust and torch smoke. He had not felt this light in a long time, not since the day he had stepped onto the docks of Knossos, certain he was walking toward death. Now he walked away from it. He turned his head slightly and looked back at the youths. Leia stood a little behind him, her hands clutching the thin cloth Ariadne had given her. The color of it was almost white now, stained by dust, but still soft. She did not look at the water. She looked at the sky, as if measuring the distance between the island and the city that had sent them away. Karen sat on the deck, his legs crossed, his arms wrapped around his knees. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if the labyrinth might still be pursuing them, even out here on the open sea. Theseus stepped back from the rail and walked toward him. "You are safe," he said quietly. "The stone ends at the shore." Karen lifted his head slowly. "Safe?" he echoed. "We just walked out of a monster's prison." Theseus knelt beside him, keeping his voice low. "You walked out," he said, "not as sacrifices, not as food. You walked as people who chose to trust a thread in each other." Karen's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I didn't choose much," he said. "I mostly followed the light of that stupid thread." Theseus nodded. "That is enough," he replied. "Sometimes the greatest choice is knowing which line to follow." Leia joined them, stepping carefully over the ropes coiled on the deck. "The king of Crete did not thank us," she said. "He did not speak to us at all when we left the labyrinth." Theseus followed her gaze to the stern, where the Cretan captain stood, his eyes fixed on the distant shore. "He did not have to," he said. "The fact that we live is enough." His silence was louder than any words. Leia frowned slightly. "You think he was afraid?" she asked. Theseus looked at the sky, where a few white clouds drifted like slow ships. "I think he was surprised," he said. The labyrinth was his answer to fear. The Minotaur was his way of saying that some things cannot be changed, and we walked through it as if the walls were only walls, not gods. Leia's fingers brushed the cloth again. "And the Minotaur?" she asked. "You said it let you pass." Theseus nodded. "It did," he replied. "It chose not to chase, not to attack. It stayed in the center, like a shadow that refused to move." Leia studied his face. "You spoke to it," she said, "not as if it were a beast, but as if it were a person." Theseus hesitated. "I spoke," he said, "as if it were something neither fully beast nor fully human, something between. Like Ariadne said, the labyrinth made a prison. The king thought it was a weapon, but the creature inside it was only a prisoner who had learned to roar when no one else would listen." Leia looked toward the horizon, where the faint line of land still hung. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "the labyrinth was wrong from the start." The ship sailed through the afternoon and into the evening. The sun lowered, painting the sea in shades of gold and orange, then soft pink and pale blue. The sky darkened slowly, the first stars appearing like faint sparks above the waves. The Athenians lay on the deck, wrapped in thin blankets, their bodies heavy from the long walk through the stone maze. Some of them slept, their breath steady, their faces finely relaxed. Karen lay on his back, his eyes open, fixed on the sky. Theseus sat beside him, his back against the mast, his hands resting on his knees. "The stars look different from here," Karen said after a long silence. Theseus glanced up. "They are the same," he replied. "The sea just makes them feel farther." Karen let out a small, tired laugh. "If the stars feel farther," he said, "the gods feel like they're watching even closer." Theseus did not answer right away. He watched the sky, the gentle rocking of the ship, the faint creak of the wood beneath them. "Maybe they are," he said at last. "But I think the gods pay more attention to how we walk through the dark than to how fast we find the light." Charon turned his head slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. Theseus looked toward the bow, as if seeing the journey ahead. "I mean that the labyrinth did not change," he said. "The stone is the same. The torches burn the same way. The walls still twist. But we walked through it differently. We followed the thread. We did not run blindly. We did not scream until we had nothing left." He paused. "The gods may have shaped the maze," he continued, "but people shaped how we walked through it. And tonight, we are not returning as the same people who left the docks of Athens." Charon's eyes softened. "Then what are we?" he asked. Theseus allowed himself a small smile. "Survivors," he said. "But not only that, if we tell the truth, if we tell what we saw, what we learned, what the Minotaur decided, we may become something else." Leia shifted in the blanket beside him. "What do you mean?" she asked. Theseus closed his eyes for a moment. "We may become the ones who changed the story," he said. "The people who walked the labyrinth and came back not with a tale of a monster, but with a tale of a choice." Back in Crete, Ariadne stood at the edge of the same stone balcony where she had watched them leave. The sun had set. The sky turned soft violet. The sea below glimmered faintly in the twilight. The labyrinth lay behind the palace, half hidden in shadow, its entrance dark and silent. A servant approached quietly. "The king has given no orders," the woman said. "The Athenians are gone. The youths are gone. The labyrinth is still sealed." Ariadne did not look at her. "And the Minotaur?" she asked softly. The servant hesitated. "It has not moved," she replied. "The gods say it is quieter than before, not roaring, not pacing, just there." Ariadne's fingers pressed against the stone railing, the same stone she had touched when she watched Theseus step out of the maze. "That is enough," she said quietly. "If it chooses to be silent, perhaps it is learning that it can be heard without fear." The servant frowned slightly. "Sire, the king may not see it that way," she said. "He sees the labyrinth as a reminder of power, not of mercy." Ariadne turned her head slowly. "Then someone must remind him," she said, "that even the most terrible prisons were built by human hands." The servant did not answer. She only bowed and stepped back. Ariadne watched the sea in the distance, where the faint outline of the Athenian ship had long since vanished. "If Theseus returns to Athens," she whispered, "he will carry more than memories. He will carry a thread that changed the maze, and a story that can change a city." In Athens, the elders gathered in the council hall once more. The room was dim, lit by oil lamps set into the stone walls. The wooden table in the center was scarred by years of debate, its surface worn smooth in the spots where hands had tapped impatiently, where fingers had traced plans. The messenger who had gone with the youths returned first, his clothes dusty, his face tired. He stood at the far end of the table, his voice low but clear. "They entered the labyrinth at dawn," he reported. "The king of Minos watched from the balcony. The guards said they heard nothing at first, only the sound of footsteps echoing in the stone." The elders listened, their brows heavy, their hands folded tightly. "And after some time," one asked, "the usual silence?" The messenger hesitated. "No," he said. "After some time, they came back." A murmur ran through the room. "What?" an elder asked, his voice sharp. They came back, the messenger repeated. The youths, all of them, unharmed. The labyrinth did not take them. The Minotaur did not eat them. Another elder leaned forward. That is impossible, he said. The labyrinth has no way out. The messenger met his eyes. It did, he replied, if you follow the thread. The elders stared. The thread? One asked. A servant entered quietly and placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay a thin piece of white wool. The messenger nodded. That, he said, was how they walked. Theseus of Athens tied one end at the entrance and unwound it as he went. The others followed it like a map written in thread. The room fell still again. An elder reached out and touched the thread, his fingers tracing its length. So it was not magic, he said slowly. It was memory. The messenger nodded. It was memory, he repeated, and choice. Outside the hall, the city slowly learned the news. First, the market knew, then the workshops, then the houses along the streets. People stopped in doorways, their hands resting on the stone frames, their eyes turned toward the sea. The youths are coming home, someone whispered. They walked through the labyrinth and came back, another said, disbelieving. They are not walking, one child said, jumping up onto a stone bench. They are sailing. The word spread like wind through the city. By the time the Athenian ship appeared on the horizon, the docks were crowded. The elders stood at the front, their faces tightly composed. The mothers and fathers stood behind them, their hands clenched, their eyes searching the sea. The children stood at the edge of the water, pointing excitedly. The ship grew larger, the sails catching the afternoon light, the bow cutting through the waves. The Athenian guards stepped off first, their eyes wary, their bodies tense. Then the youths. Leia stepped onto the dock, her legs unsteady at first, then steadier as she felt the stone beneath her feet. Chiron followed, blinking against the bright light, his hands pressed against the rail until he finally stepped down. Theseus came last. He did not look at the elders immediately. He looked at the people, the faces he did not know, the hands that reached out, the tears that fell. For a moment, he simply breathed. He was home, not as the boy who had left with a wild claim, but as the one who had walked through the dark and come back. The elders met them in the central square. The sun was still high, the square crowded with people who had left their work, their tools, their fields. Theseus stood before the old stone table, the remnants of the decree still lying there, the edges worn by time and many hands. The oldest elder cleared his throat. You who walked into the labyrinth, he said, his voice heavy with authority. Tell us what you saw. Theseus looked at the people around him. He saw Charon, still pale, but standing tall. He saw Leia, holding the cloth Ariadne had given her, her eyes calm. He saw the mothers who had not dared to hope, the fathers who had pretended they were not afraid. He took a breath. We walked, he said, his voice steady, into a maze of stone. The walls were tall, the corridors were long, the torches burned with the same light we see here. The labyrinth is not a living thing that breathes hatred. It is only a place built by hands that feared too much. The crowd listened, their eyes fixed on him. He continued. We walked with a thread, he said, a thin line of wool tied at the entrance, unwound as we went. The thread did not fight the walls. It did not roar. It only remembered the path, and the people who followed it did not die. A murmur ran through the crowd, softer this time. And the Minotaur? One of the elders asked, his voice firmer, almost challenging. Was it truly beaten? Was it truly killed? Theseus hesitated. Then he shook his head. No, he said. The Minotaur lives. It chose not to chase us, not to attack. It stayed in the center of the maze, like a shadow that no longer wished to frighten. The elders looked at each other, unsure. That is not a victory, one said. That is a negotiation. Theseus's jaw tightened. Is it, he asked, if a city spends generations sending children to a monster because it believes there is no other way, and then one generation walks through the maze and returns alive, does that not change the story? The elder did not answer. The crowd did not move. Theseus looked at the thread in his hand, the same thread that had lain in the council chamber. We walked, he said again, softer. We did not run. We did not scream until we had nothing left. And in the end, the labyrinth did not swallow us. It simply let us pass. The square grew quiet again. Then slowly a woman stepped forward. She was not young. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her hands were rough from work. Then we were wrong, she said, her voice shaking. For generations we told our children that the labyrinth was a law of the gods, that the Minotaur could not be passed, and you walked through it and came back. Theseus looked at her. I walked with help, he said. The thread was given to me. The knife was given to me. The courage was given to me by the others who chose to believe we could return. The woman pressed her hand against her chest. Then we will not send our children again, she said. If there is a way through, if there is a choice instead of a sentence, we will find it. The elders shifted, their faces tightening. You speak quickly, one said. The labyrinth may be passed once. It may not be passed again. Theseus did not back down. Then we will pass it again, he said, and again, until the fear that built it fades. Leia stepped forward beside him. If we do not send our youths, she said, King Minos may see it as rebellion. Theseus turned his head slightly. Let him see it as truth, he replied. If Crete wants war, we will fight. But we will no longer send our children into the dark as if their blood is the only language we know. The crowd murmured, the sound growing stronger. The elders looked at each other, then back at the people. For the first time in generations, the square did not feel like a submission to fate. It felt like a decision. That night, Theseus stood again by the sea, this time on an Athenian rock, looking toward Crete. The island was hidden in the darkness, the sea stretching between them like a long, dark road. The wind carried the faint sound of waves and distant voices. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the water, the slow beating of his own heart. The labyrinth still stood. The Minotaur still waited. The city of Crete still believed in the power of its maze. But something had changed. Not in the stone, not in the walls, but in the minds of those who had walked through it and come back. Leia, he said quietly. Karen. They appeared beside him, their steps soft on the rock. If we tell this story, he said, we will not tell it only once. Leia nodded. We will tell it in the square, she said, in the market, in the homes, until the thread is not just wool in the maze, but a symbol of what can be remembered. Karen looked at the sea again. And the Minotaur? He asked. Will we say it was defeated, or only changed? Theseus opened his eyes slowly. We will say it chose, he replied. We will say it did not have to let us pass, but it did. And that is the most important thing the labyrinth taught us. He turned his head slightly, looking at both of them. The labyrinth did not make us heroes, he said. It made us remember that even the most impossible places can be walked through if someone dares to follow a thread instead of running in circles. The three of them stood in silence, watching the dark sea. Somewhere across it, Ariadne stood on her balcony, also looking toward the horizon. Both cities, so far apart, were held together now by a thin line of memory, a thread that had led youths through stone, and a story that would never again be told the same way. Part 7. The Thread in the Sky. The summer in Athens was long and warm. The sun rose early, turning the white stone of the city into a glowing map of light. The sea shimmered at the edge of the world, a soft blue line where the land ended and the sky began. The docks bustled, the fields grew green, and the streets filled with the steady rhythm of ordinary life. But something had changed. The fear of Crete no longer walked through the houses like a shadow. The story of the Labyrinth did. It was told in the market, at the harbor, by the hearth at night. It was told with different voices, different details, but always the same core. The youths had walked into the maze. They had come back. The Minotaur had not eaten them. The thread had led them out. Children listened with wide eyes, their hands pressed against their chests, as if they could feel the stone in their own bones. And each time the story was told, it grew a little quieter, a little more like a memory, and less like a nightmare. Theseus did not return to being a boy. He did not slip back into the quiet life he had known before the sea had taken him. The elders watched him now with a new kind of attention. The people whispered his name in corners, not just as Theseus of Athens, but as Theseus who walked the labyrinth. He did not like it at first. He did not think of himself as a hero. He thought of himself as someone who had followed a thread and listened to a voice that did not roar. But the city did not allow him to forget. Every time he passed the square, someone would stop him. "Tell us again," a mother would say, her eyes bright. "Tell us how you walked through the stone," a fisher would ask, his hands rough and stained with salt. Theseus did not refuse. He sat on the stone steps near the well, the shade of the old tree wrapping around him, and spoke slowly, clearly, as if he were writing a map in words instead of wool. He told them about the corridors, about the torches, about the way the shadows twisted. He told them about the Minotaur's eyes, the way they had not filled with hunger, only with something older and stranger. And he told them about the thread, the thin white line that had remembered every turn, every crossing, every moment when the maze had tried to make them forget the way. One evening, Leia sat beside him as he spoke. The square was full. The sun had lowered, the light softer now, the stone walls glowing in warm gold and soft beige. The air smelled of bread and herbs, the faint salt of the sea drifting from the harbor. A child at the front of the crowd looked up at Theseus, his hands clutching the hem of his mother's robe. "You say the thread led you out," the boy said, "but what if it had broken?" Theseus looked at him. The question was simple, but it was also deep. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The thread did not break. It stayed whole. But if it had," he hesitated. "If the thread had broken," he continued, "then we would have had to remember the path ourselves. We would have had to listen to the stone, the light, the way the air changed as we turned. We would have had to trust each other more than the wool." The child's eyes widened. "So the thread was not magic?" he asked. Theseus shook his head. "No," he said. "The thread was only a reminder. The magic was that we walked together." Leia placed a hand on the thin cloth Ariadne had given her, still tied in a small knot at her belt. Some people say Ariadne was the true hero, she said quietly, that she gave you the thread, the knife, the chance. Theseus nodded. She was, he said, not because she was the king's daughter, but because she chose to help. In a place that seemed built on fear, she chose to trust something different. The crowd listened, their faces thoughtful. The elders, standing at the edge of the square, shifted slightly, their hands resting on their staffs. The old story of the labyrinth had been one of terror and obedience. Now it was becoming a story of memory, choice, and trust. The city felt the change, even if no one could name it. Far away in Crete, the labyrinth remained. The stone did not change. The corridors still twisted. The center chambers still waited. The torches burning in the same places, the walls smooth and pale. The Minotaur sat in the center, its horns catching the faint golden light. It did not pace. It did not roar. It only watched the dark mouths of the corridors, listening to the echoes, waiting for something, for another thread, for another voice, for another choice. The gods spoke of the silence. The Minotaur is quieter now, one said to another, his voice low, almost as if it were tired of chasing fear. The other god frowned. Beasts do not tire of fear, he replied. They live on it. The first man shook his head. Maybe this one does not, he said. Maybe it is learning that there are other sounds besides running feet and screams. They did not argue, but they glanced toward the center of the labyrinth, as if the silence itself were something strange and new. Ariadne walked the palace gardens alone that evening. The sun was setting behind the mountains, the sky turning soft violet and pale gold. The sea below glittered faintly, the boat's tiny specks on the water. She held a small ball of thread in her hand, the same pale wool she had given to Theseus. Her fingers moved it slowly, as if she were winding and unwinding an invisible path. A servant approached, her steps careful. "The king has not spoken of the Athenians since they left," the woman said. "He sits at the balcony more often, watching the sea." Ariadne nodded. "He is watching something he does not understand," she replied. "He built the labyrinth to show that some things cannot be changed, and now people have walked through it and come back." The servant hesitated. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. Ariadne looked at the thread. "I will remember," she said. "The kings may build walls, but the people who walk through them build the story. If Theseus tells the tale in Athens, and if we listen here, the labyrinth may become something else." The servant looked confused. "What else?" she asked. Ariadne's lips curved, almost a smile. "A warning," she said. "Not of a monster, but of how easily people turn fear into stone. The labyrinth was not built to kill. It was built to hide the truth." She placed the thread carefully into a small wooden box. "And the thread?" the servant asked. Ariadne closed the lid softly. "The thread," she said, "is the part of the story that will not stay in one palace, one city, or one island. It will spread wherever memory goes." In Athens, the thread spread slowly like water soaking into thirsty ground. On the walls of the marketplace, someone carved a simple line, a path winding left and right, meeting in the center and leading back out. Children traced it with their fingers. Mothers told their children that the line was not a decoration, but a reminder. "There was a maze somewhere across the sea," they said, "and someone walked through it with a thread. You do not walk blind through your own life either." In the schools, the teachers began to tell the story differently. They spoke of the labyrinth as a test of the mind, not just of courage. Fear cuts the way short, one old teacher said, his chalk tapping on the stone tablet. Memory and trust lengthen it. The students listened, their eyes bright, their hands resting on the smooth stone desks. The thread was no longer only a thing in the maze. It was a symbol, a quiet word for something that could be followed even when the walls were dark. Theseus did not stay in the square forever. He walked through the city, listening to the way his name sounded now. Sometimes it was heavy with expectation. Sometimes it was soft with gratitude. He did not feel like a king, but he did begin to feel like a bridge between the old way of thinking and the new one, between fear and the fragile courage of remembering a path. One day he stood at the edge of the harbor again, watching the ships come and go. The salt in the air reminded him of Crete. The stone of the docks reminded him of the labyrinth. The rope coiled on the wooden decks reminded him of the thread. A fisher approached him, an older man, his skin darkened by years under the sun. "You are the one they talk about," the man said. "The one who walked the labyrinth?" Theseus nodded. "That is what they say," he replied. The fisher looked toward the sea, where the horizon shimmered faintly. "Do you think we will ever have to go back there?" he asked. "Will Crete send another decree? Another demand?" Theseus did not answer immediately. He watched the waves beat gently against the stone. "I don't know," he said at last. "The labyrinth is still there. The king is still there. The sea between us is still the same." The fisher frowned. "Then the fear may come back," he said. Theseus shook his head slightly. "No," he said, "the fear may try, but we will not let it be the only thing we remember." He placed a hand on the rough stone of the dock. "The thread did not change the stone," he said. "The thread did not change the Minotaur. The thread only changed the way we walked through it. If we carry that memory here, then even if we have to face the sea again, we will not walk it like we once walked to Crebus did." The fisher looked at him, the words settling into his mind. "So what do we do now?" he asked. Theseus turned away from the water and looked at the city rising behind the harbor. "Now," he said, "we remember. We tell the story. We teach our children that even the most impossible places can be walked through if someone dares to follow a thread instead of running in circles." The fisher nodded slowly, his shoulders straightening. "Then we will plant our own thread into the stone," he said, "not of fear, but of memory." That night, Theseus climbed the hill that overlooked the city. The square glowed faintly below, the torches like small stars. The houses clustered along the slopes, the streets like quiet rivers winding through the stone. The sea far below was a soft, dark line. He sat on the edge of the rock, his hands resting on his knees, the warm stone under his palms. Leia joined him after some time, her steps light, her breath steady. "You come here often," she said, sitting beside him. Theseus nodded. "When the city feels too loud," he replied. "The sea and the sky are quiet enough for me." Leia looked at the scattered lights of the houses. "Do you think they will forget?" she asked. "The story?" Theseus considered. "Some will," he said. "The fear will always have a place in the heart. It will always whisper that the labyrinth is too strong, the Minotaur too terrible, the sea too wide." Leia's fingers brushed the cloth at her belt again. "And the others?" she asked. Theseus leaned back slightly, looking up at the sky. "The others," he said, "will remember the thread. The others will remember that the maze was only stone." The others will remember that the Minotaur chose to let us pass. The stars blinked softly above them. We do not have to believe it once, he continued. We have to believe it each time we are afraid. Each time we face a dark corridor in our own life, a choice we do not understand, a wall we think cannot be passed. Leia smiled faintly. So you made the labyrinth into a lesson, she said. Theseus shook his head. No, he replied. The labyrinth was already a lesson. I only walked through it enough to hear it. They sat in silence for a long moment. The city whispered below. The sea whispered on the shore. The sky watched, endless and quiet, as if all stories were already written in its light. Years later, when the children of Athens grew up, the harbor still stood, the sea still shimmered, and the stone of the city still held the imprint of many feet. The square still echoed with voices, but the stories told there had changed. They did not speak of a helpless city forced to send its children into the dark. They spoke of a city that had walked through the dark and come back. They spoke of a youth who had followed a thread, of a princess who had trusted that thread, of a monster who had chosen not to chase, and of a people who had learned that even the tallest walls were built by hands and could be remembered by hearts. The labyrinth never disappeared. The stones still stood on Crete. The torches still burned in their holders. The center chamber still waited. But the story that lived in the sea between the islands did not remain a tale of fear. It became a quiet thread stretched across the water, a reminder that even the most impossible paths can be walked as long as someone dares to remember the way. Part 9. The Thread of Memory. The years passed gently through Athens like a soft wind through tall grass. The stone buildings wore slightly under the sun and the sea spray. The market stalls shifted with the seasons. The ships came and went, bringing new goods, new voices, and new stories. The children grew, their small hands turning into strong ones, their wide eyes into wiser, calmer ones. But the story of the labyrinth did not fade. It changed shape, softened at the edges, but it stayed. In the square, the old stone table still stood at the center. The scribes carved a simple line into its surface, a winding path that turned, met itself, and then led out again. Children traced it with their fingers, their mothers guiding their hands, their voices low. It is the thread, the mothers would say, the one that led Theseus and the others through the maze. The children would look up, their eyes bright. Can we walk the same path? They would ask. The mothers would smile softly. You walk your own path, they would reply, but you can remember theirs. Theseus did not grow old quietly, but he did grow old. His hair darkened into a deep brown streaked with gray. His shoulders broadened. His hands grew rough from years of work and travel. The scars of the sea and the sun marked his skin, but the calm in his eyes remained. He did not sit on the steps in the square every day, but he came often enough that the elders knew when he was there by the way the crowd shifted. On certain evenings, the storytellers would call his name. Theseus, they would say, their voices carrying over the stone. Tell them again. Tell them the way through the maze. He never refused. He would sit at the edge of the well, the old tree casting its shadow over him, and he would speak slowly, clearly, as if he were writing the path in the air. He told the children how the corridors had all looked the same, how the torchlight had flickered and danced on the walls, how the sound of his own footsteps had echoed until it sounded like many different people walking behind him. He told them about the moment he first saw the Minotaur, not in a blur of fear, but in a stillness that made the world feel smaller. He told them about the thread, the thin white wool that Ariadne had given him, the way he had tied one end to the stone pillar, the way he had unwound it slowly behind him, step by step, turn by turn, and he told them about the choice he had made not to run blindly, the choice the Minotaur had made not to chase, the choice the people had made to remember instead of forget. The children listened, their knees pressed to the warm stone, their hands resting on their chests, as if they could feel the beat of the sea in their own hearts. The elders listened too, their eyes thoughtful, their hands resting on their staffs. The story had become a part of the city, like the sea and the stone and the wind. It was no longer just a tale from another land. It was a lesson built into the way the people thought, the way they spoke, the way they raised their children. Charon also grew older. The fear that had lived in his voice when he first stepped into the labyrinth had not left him entirely, but it had changed shape. It had become a kind of respect for the sea, for the wind, for the long corridors of life that no one could see the end of. He stayed a sailor. His hands knew the ropes better than anyone else's on the docks. His voice was steady even in storms. Other sailors listened to him when the waves grew high and the sky turned dark. Sometimes when the crew felt the weight of the sea pressing down on them, someone would glance at Charon and say, "Remember the maze." Charon would nod, not always smiling, but always sure. "I remember," he would reply. He would look at the deck, the swaying mast, the stretched sails, and he would speak quietly, as if he were guiding the ship through an invisible path. "The sea is like the labyrinth," he would say. "It turns, it twists, it hides the way. But the waves do not forget the shore. The wind does not erase the coast. If we keep our eyes on the light, we will find our way." The crew would listen, their fear softening just enough to let them work. The thread in the story had become a thread in the way they sailed. It was not written in wool, but in the rhythm of their hands, the timing of their voices, the way they trusted each other when the sea tried to hide the horizon. Leia did not leave Athens. The city had become the place where the story lived, where the memory of the maze was carried not in stone, but in voices. She walked through the streets every day, her hands sometimes resting on the thin cloth Ariadne had given her, the one that had stayed with her since the labyrinth. The cloth had faded over the years, the edges soft, the color almost white, but she still wore it around her wrist like a quiet reminder. She told the story in different places. In the homes, she sat by the hearths, the fire glowing softly, the children huddled close, the mothers whispering questions. "What do we do when life feels like the labyrinth?" one mother asked her once, her voice low. Leia looked at the clay bowl beside her, the soft light of the fire dancing on its surface. "We remember the thread," she said. The mother frowned. "The thread," she repeated. "The one in the maze?" Leia nodded. "The thread," she said, "is not only in the stone, it is in the choices we make. Each time we choose not to run blindly, each time we listen, each time we trust, we are following the thread." The mother's eyes softened. "But the walls feel so high," she said. "The corridors feel endless." Leia's fingers brushed the cloth on her wrist. "Then we walk one step at a time," she replied. The thread did not change the maze. The thread only showed the way. The maze was still the maze. The walls were still the walls, but the path existed. The mother nodded slowly, as if something deep inside her had shifted. "Then the path always exists," she said. Leia looked at the fire for a moment. "Not always," she said honestly, "but more often than we think. The hardest part is not finding the path. it is believing it is there. The woman smiled faintly, the fear in her eyes not gone, but smaller. In Crete, the story traveled too, though more quietly. The people of Knossos did not gather in a square every evening to hear the elders speak, but the servants whispered in the kitchens. The guards talked in the corridors, the children played along the stone paths, their small hands tracing lines in the dust. The labyrinth still stood beneath the mountain, the stone corridors twisting, the torches burning, the center chamber waiting. The Minotaur sat in the dark, its horns catching the faint light, its eyes quiet, as if it had grown used to the silence. The gods no longer spoke of it only as a monster. Sometimes one would say, the Minotaur has not moved from the center in many years. Another would say, maybe it is waiting. For what? Someone might ask. The first would shrug. For the next who walks the maze, they might say. Or for the ones who remember. The palace above the labyrinth also changed. The king grew older, his dark hair fading into silver, his face harder but quieter. He still stood at the balcony many evenings, his eyes fixed on the sea, as if he were waiting for something he did not understand. The gods whispered that he watched the labyrinth more often than he watched the sea now. Sometimes he would walk down the long stone road toward the entrance, the guards following a respectful distance behind him. He would stop at the dark doorway, the torchlight flickering inside, the air cool and heavy. He would stand there for a long time, his hands resting on the stone, his breath steady, his eyes searching the darkness for something he could not name. The labyrinth did not answer. The walls stayed still. The maze did not change. But the king's face would soften slightly, as if the memory of the maze pressed against something old and heavy in his heart. Ariadne did not leave Crete either. The palace was her home, the gardens her quiet place, the sea her distant horizon. She walked the same paths every evening, the same soft wool thread in her hand, the box safely kept in her room. The years had painted grey into her dark hair, but her eyes were still clear, her hands steady, her voice calm. The servants who had been young when Theseus first came to Crete were older now, their faces lined, their steps slower. They watched Ariadne with something between respect and affection. She remembers more than anyone, they would say among themselves. She remembers the boy who walked the labyrinth, the thread that led him out, the story that crossed the sea. The children of the palace, sons and daughters of the guards, of the cooks, of the gardeners, would gather around her sometimes in the gardens, their eyes wide. Tell us again, they would say. Tell us about the thread. Ariadne would sit on the stone bench, the box resting on her lap, the sea glimmering faintly behind her. She would open the box, the soft white thread sliding out like a line of light. The thread, she would say, was not magic. It was only wool spun thin, wound into a ball by a hand that believed it could lead someone through the dark. The children would watch the thread as if it were alive, as if it could speak. Ariadne would tell them about Theseus, about the way he had tied one end to the stone, about the way he had walked slowly, the thread slipping behind him like a quiet memory. She would tell them about the Minotaur's eyes, the way they had not filled with rage, but with something older and stranger. And she would tell them about the choice the Minotaur had made to let them pass, the choice Theseus had made to walk instead of run, the choice the people had made to remember instead of forget. The children would listen, their hands pressed against their chests, their hearts beating with a quiet wonder. By the time Ariadne finished, the thread in her hands would feel lighter, as if it had grown stronger through the telling. The thread, she would say at the end, is not only in the maze, it is in the way we remember. As long as someone remembers the path, the maze is not truly a prison. The children would nod, their eyes shining, as if the story had given them a quiet map to carry in their own hearts. One evening, an old Athenian ship sailed into the harbor of Knossos. The sailors were weather-worn, their hands rough, their beards streaked with gray. The deck was worn smooth by years of travel, the sails patched in places, but the ship moved steadily, its nose cutting through the waves with a quiet purpose. The guards watched it warily as it docked, their hands resting on their weapons, their eyes searching the deck for signs of danger. None came. The sailors stepped off slowly, their eyes taking in the stone docks, the rising palace, the distant mountain where the labyrinth waited. One of them approached the dockmaster, an older man whose face bore the same lines as the sea. "We come from Athens," the sailor said. "We bring a message." The dockmaster frowned. "Athenians?" he asked. "After so many years?" The sailor nodded. "We bring a story," he said, "and something else." The dockmaster motioned toward the guards. "Bring them to the palace," he ordered. "The king may wish to hear it." The guards hesitated, then stepped forward. The Athenian sailors did not resist. They walked the stone steps in silence, their boots echoing softly, their eyes fixed on the palace ahead. At the top of the stairs, an old Cretan woman watched them from the edge of the courtyard. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes sharp, her hands resting on a simple wooden box. The sailors stopped when they saw her. They recognized the way she held the box, the way her eyes met theirs, the way the soft white thread peeked from the edge of the lid. "Leia?" one of the sailors asked quietly. The woman smiled faintly. "I am older," she said, "and so are you." The sailors' faces softened. "You carry it," one said, his voice low. "The thread." Leia nodded. "I do," she replied, "as your city does on the other side of the sea." The guards watched, unsure whom to protect and whom to let pass. The king appeared at the edge of the balcony, his eyes narrowing as he saw the Athenians in the courtyard. The old guard who had once watched the labyrinth for years stepped toward him, his steps slow. "They do not come with weapons," he said quietly. "They come with words." The king's jaw tightened, but he did not command them to leave. Leia stepped forward, the box in her hands, the thread resting inside like a quiet memory. "King Minos," she said, her voice steady, "I bring a message from Athens, not of war, not of fear, but of memory." The king's eyes flickered as if something in the word memory stirred a deeper place in him. "Memory of what?" he asked, his voice low. Leia opened the box slowly, the soft white thread glowing faintly in the warm light of the evening. "Of the day the youths walked into the labyrinth," she said. "Of the day they came back. Of the thread that led them out. Of the choice the Minotaur made to let them pass." The king's face did not change at first, but his eyes shifted toward the mountain where the labyrinth waited, the dark stone glowing faintly in the distance. The guards watched. The old Athenian sailors watched. Ariadne watched from the edge of the courtyard, the box in her own hands mirror-like Leia's. "The thread," Leia continued, "did not stay in the maze. It crossed the sea. It grew into a story told in the square, in the homes, in the hearts of the people. Your children in the palace garden know it. Our children in Athens know it." The king's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "And what do you want from me?" he asked. Leia looked at the thread, then at him. "Nothing," she said. "We do not ask for gold. We do not ask for land. We do not ask for war. We ask only that you remember." The word hung in the air, soft and heavy. "Remember," the king repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Yes," Leia replied. "Remember that the labyrinth was not built to kill. It was built to hide the truth. And the truth is that even the most impossible paths can be walked through if someone dares to remember the way." The king did not answer immediately. He looked at the thread, at the box, at Leia's face, at the sea in the distance, at the mountain where the labyrinth waited. He looked at Ariadne, his eyes softening just slightly. The guards watched, the sailors watched, the servants watched. The city of Knossos stood still, holding its breath. Finally, the king spoke. "The thread," he said quietly, "has crossed the sea many times. It traveled with the youths. It traveled with the story. It traveled with you." Leia nodded. "It has," she said. The king's gaze turned toward the mountain. "And I," he said, "have stayed in the same place." He did not say it bitterly, but with a quiet weight, as if the words themselves were heavy. Leia did not press him. The king lowered his head slightly, his hands resting on the stone railing. "Then remember this," he said at last, his voice low. "The labyrinth still stands. The walls still twist. The Minotaur still waits in the center. But the people on this island now know the story too. They know that the maze did not eat everyone. They know that the thread led them out." He looked at Ariadne, "And that you gave it." Ariadne stepped forward, the box in her hands matching Leia's. "The thread," she said, "belongs to no one king, no one city, no one island. It belongs to the ones who remember the path." The king's lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "Then let it remember," he said. "Let it walk the sea again and again until the story is no longer only of fear, but of the way we walked through it." Leia closed her box softly. "The thread will do that," she said, "as long as someone holds it." The king did not speak again. He turned and walked slowly back into the palace, his steps heavy but steady, the sea wind pulling at his robes, the mountain watching him like a silent witness. The guards parted, the sailors bowed their heads. Ariadne looked at Leia, and the two women stood in the courtyard, the boxes in their hands, the thread inside connecting not only the maze, but the two cities, the two peoples, the two stories. The sea stretched between them, wide and quiet, the waves beating gently against the stone docks, the sky above glowing with the soft light of the evening. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the children of Athens traced the winding path carved into the stone, their fingers resting on the line of the thread, their hearts remembering the way. And somewhere beneath the mountain, the Minotaur sat in the dark, his eyes closed, his breath even, the faint echo of footsteps from another time soft in his ears. The thread had not changed the stone, it had not changed the sea, but it had changed the way the people walked through both. Part 10. The Thread in the Sky. The sea between Athens and Crete never stopped moving. It rose and fell with the breath of the world, the waves breaking gently against the stone docks, the salt in the air clinging to faces, ships, and the long memories of the two cities. The sun still rose over the eastern cliffs, the sky still turned pale blue, then warm gold, then soft violet at the edge of the evening. The stone of the cities still stood, worn by time, but still standing. But the stories had changed. They were no longer only of fear and sacrifice, of monsters and mazes, of kings who demanded blood and cities that obeyed. They were also of a thread that had traveled across the sea, of a youth who had walked through the stone, of a monster who had chosen not to chase, of a princess and a woman who had carried the same thin line in their hands. The thread had become something larger than wool or stone. It had become a quiet lesson that moved through the years like the tide. In Athens, the square no longer needed Theseus to speak every evening for the story to live. Children grew up knowing the path of the thread by heart, even if they had never seen the labyrinth. They traced the winding line carved into the stone table, the old well still cool and dark, the steps worn smooth by many feet. The scribes wrote the story in clean lines. The artists painted it in soft colors on the walls of the smaller halls. The storytellers repeated it in different words, but always with the same core: the thread, the choice, the memory. The children would ask, "Did he really walk through the maze?" The elders would nod. "He did," they would say, "and he came back telling us that the maze was not a living thing that hated him. It was only a place built by someone who was afraid of the truth." The children would look at the sea, where the ships moved like tiny birds, and they would feel something settle in their chests. The fear did not vanish. It still sat in the dark corners of the heart, the way shadows always do. But over the years, it grew smaller. The people of Athens remembered the thread and the way it had led them out of the maze, the way it had crossed the sea, the way it had become a story told in the homes, the docks, the gardens. Theseus did not live forever, but the story did. When he grew old, he walked the square less often, leaning on a simple wooden staff, his eyes softer, his voice quieter, but still steady. The children would run to him when they saw him, eager to hear the story from the one who had walked it. "Theseus," they would say, tugging gently at his robe, "tell us about the Minotaur." He would sit on the steps, the shade of the old tree wrapping around him, the sea whispering in the distance, and he would speak slowly, clearly, as if he were drawing the path in the air again. He would tell them about the corridors, the torches, the way the shadows twisted. He would tell them about the moment he first saw the Minotaur, not in fury, but in stillness, in a kind of waiting that had no easy name. And he would tell them about the thread, the thin white wool that Ariadne had given him, the way he had tied one end to the stone pillar, the way it had slipped behind him like a quiet memory, the way he had followed it back, the youths behind him. The children would listen, their hands pressed against their chests, as if the memory of the maze lived in their own bones. "Theseus," a child would ask, "did you ever feel afraid?" He would smile faintly. "All the time," he would reply. The maze was dark, the walls were high, the Minotaur was real, the fear was real. The difference was not that I had no fear. The difference was that I chose not to let it erase the path." The children would nod, their eyes wide, their hearts memorizing the lesson more than the words. When Theseus grew too old to walk the square, the elders sat in his place, the carvings of the thread still clear on the stone, the box safely kept in the small room where the storytellers gathered. The thread itself lay in another box, the soft white wool still intact, the years only softening the edges of the cloth that held it. The story lived on without him, carried by the voices of the people, the scribes, the artists, the children who grew into adults and then into elders themselves. "The thread is the memory," they would say. "The maze is the fear. The choice is walking with the thread instead of running in circles." And the people of Athens walked with the thread in their hearts, even when the sea seemed wide and the paths uncertain. In Crete, the story traveled too, though more quietly. The labyrinth still stood beneath the mountain, the stone corridors still twisting, the torches still burning, the center chamber still waiting. The Minotaur sat in the dark, its horns catching the faint golden light, its eyes closed, its breath even, like a stone guardian listening to the echo of footsteps that might never come again. The guards still walked the corridors, the palace still rose above the sea. The king still watched the horizon from the balcony many evenings, the expression on his face softer now, as if the memory of the maze had pressed into something old in his heart. The servants whispered in the kitchens, the guards spoke in the corridors, the children ran in the gardens, their small hands tracing lines in the dust, the way they had seen the elders do. "They say the thread crossed the sea," a child said once, sitting cross-legged in the soft grass, the sea shimmering faintly in the distance. An older servant nodded, her hands resting on her knees. "It did," she replied. The thread walked the maze, led the youths out, traveled back to Athens, then came here again in the hands of the storytellers. The child frowned. "But why?" he asked. "Why did the thread come back?" The servant looked toward the palace, where Ariadne walked the garden paths, the wooden box in her hands, the soft white thread spilling over the edge like a line of light. "Because the story belongs to more than one city," she said. "The thread remembers the way, no matter which shore it starts from." The child studied the line the servant had drawn in the dust, the path that turned, met itself, and then led out again. "So the maze is not only in the mountain," he said slowly. "It is in the way we think." The servant smiled faintly. "Yes," she replied. "The real maze is the one we build in our minds. The labyrinth of stone is only a reminder of it." The child nodded, his eyes bright. "Then we can remember the path," he said, "like the thread." The servant placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can," she said, "if we choose to." The story moves slowly through Crete, carried in the voices of the servants, the guards, the children, the sailors who visited Athens and returned with new words, new faces, new memories. The thread became a quiet lesson in Knossos too. It was not carved into the stone of the palace, but it was woven into the way the people spoke of the labyrinth, the way they looked at the mountain, the way they remembered the Minotaur, not only as a beast, but as a creature who had made a choice. Ariadne lived until the sea itself seemed older than her. Her hair turned fully silver, her eyes still clear, her hands steady, the soft white thread still safe in the wooden box she carried with her on certain evenings. The gardens of the palace had changed with the years. The trees grew taller, the paths wore smooth, the sea sparkled beyond the cliffs like a never-ending mirror. She walked those paths often, the box in her hands, the thread spilling out when she opened it, the way it had on the first night she had given it to Theseus. The children of the palace, the children of the guards, the children of the cooks and the gardeners would gather around her sometimes, their eyes bright, their hands pressed against their chests. "Tell us again," they would say. "Tell us about the thread." She would sit on the stone bench, the sea glimmering faintly behind her, the sky turning soft pink and gold, the air carrying the scent of herbs and salt. She would open the box, the thread slipping out like a line of light. "The thread," she would say, "was not magic. It was only wool, spun thin, wound into a ball by a hand that believed it could lead someone through the dark." The children would watch the thread as if it could move on its own, as if it could whisper the path to them. She would tell them about Theseus, about the way he had tied one end to the stone, the way he had walked slowly, the thread slipping behind him like a quiet memory. She would tell them about the Minotaur's eyes, the way they had not filled with rage, but with something older and stranger. And she would tell them about the choice the Minotaur had made to let them pass, the choice Theseus had made to walk instead of run, the choice the people had made to remember instead of forget. The children would listen, their hands pressed against their chests, their hearts beating with a quiet wonder. By the time Ariadne finished, the thread in her hands would feel lighter, as if it had grown stronger through the telling. The thread, she would say at the end, is not only in the maze, it is in the way we remember. As long as someone remembers the path, the maze is not truly a prison. The children would nod, their eyes shining, as if the story had given them a quiet map to carry in their own hearts. The thread crossed the sea again and again, not in wool, but in words, in memories, in the way the children traced the path in the dust, the way the guards spoke of the labyrinth with a new kind of quiet, the way the king watched the mountain with a softer gaze. The cities did not become the same. The sea was still wide, the stone still stood, the labyrinth still waited in the mountain, the Minotaur still sat in the dark. But the fear had changed. It had grown older, quieter, less certain of its power. The thread had not erased it, but it had walked through it, the way Theseus had walked through the stone, the way Ariadne had walked through the silence of the palace, the way the people of both cities had walked through the years carrying the same story. The thread had become a quiet line of memory stretched across the sea. It did not shout. It did not roar. It only persisted, like the rhythm of the waves, like the turning of the seasons, like the way the children traced the path in the dust. The elders carved it into the stone. The storytellers spoke it in the square. The sailors carried it in their voices. The mothers whispered it in the kitchens. The fathers told it by the hearths. The thread became a way of living in the world, not only a way of walking through the labyrinth. It became a reminder that even the most impossible paths can be walked through as long as someone dares to remember the way. And the people remembered. In Athens, in Crete, in the cities that the sailors visited, the places the artists sailed to, the islands where the storytellers carried the tale and the thread in their hands or in their hearts. The thread no longer needed wool to exist. It lived in the choices people made, in the way they walked when the walls felt high, in the way they listened when the maze tried to hide the path, in the way they trusted when the dark seemed too heavy. The labyrinth still stood. The Minotaur still waited. The sea still stretched between the cities. But the story had won something more lasting than stone. It had won memory, and memory, unlike the maze, did not forget. The thread in the sky stretched quietly, unseen but felt, a line of light that connected the two shores, the two peoples, the two hearts, the two cities that had once sent youths to die and now sent stories to live. The thread in the sky did not vanish. It simply became part of the sky itself, a quiet line in the evening light, a whisper in the sea, and a map in the hearts of those who remembered that even the most impossible journeys can be walked through, as long as someone dares to hold the thread.